Number one, Sir Hal Miller.
One, sir.
This morning I presided at a meeting of the Cabinet and had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others.
Sir Hal Miller.
Mr. Speaker, would my right honourable friend agree that reductions in interest rates following a fall in inflation will sharpen the already competitive position of the motor industry in this country, which increased exports last year by 18%? Is not these rising exports, rising investment, increased skill levels proof positive that we are achieving what Labour claims to want, that we should stick with our policies rather than cutting and running with Labour?
I can scarcely disagree with my honourable friend. The motor industry's record is a very impressive export record, and I think that is a tribute to the good design and to the increasing competitiveness and the increasing work rate of those people who work within the industry.
Mr. Neil Kinnock.
Mr. Speaker, would the Prime Minister take this opportunity to explain to the 110,000 people who lost their job in the course of the last month that they did so as a direct result of his incompetent economic policies?
It is interesting that the right honourable gentleman made no mention of this matter during the 40 months in which unemployment fell month after month after month. And although I regret the rise in unemployment, I think the right honourable gentleman will have to concede that the level of unemployment we have in this country at 6.6% is not only well below the European community average, it is very well below the average of most of our European partners.
Mr. Speaker, today's figures show the biggest January rise in unemployment since 1981, in the last Tory slump. When they've done this twice in one decade, regardless of who was the leader, regardless of who was the Chancellor, is it any wonder that they will always be known as the party of unemployment?
The right honourable gentleman may find it difficult to explain why unemployment rates are 9% in France, 9.9% in Italy, 9.3% in Canada, and 6.6% here. He may also have overlooked the fact that there's been a considerable rise in the number of job vacancies.
Perhaps the Prime Minister, then. Perhaps the Prime Minister, who is the Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, not of France, will the Prime Minister explain why it is that in order for Tory policies to work, hundreds of thousands of people have to stop working?
The right honourable gentleman's track record in these predictions is simply not good. He will recall predicting that mass unemployment of 6 million was inevitable. It wasn't, and his predictions now are wrong.
Sir Anthony Grant.
When my right honourable friend is reflecting today on the situation in the Gulf, would he agree that a dictator like Saddam Hussein, who has not scrupled to murder his own people over a whole course of years, would probably have no scruples about allowing innocent people to suffer in a bombing raid for the purposes of propaganda? And would he further agree with me that this tragic event in Baghdad and the sad loss of life should not mean that a single Allied soldier should be put at risk by an over-premature land assault?
As my honourable friend knows, we will consider very carefully when it is right to launch a land assault, and the situation in that regard remains as I have described it to the House in the past. May I say that everyone regrets the death of civilians, particularly in the tragic circumstances we've seen in the last few hours. But I must say to the House that the United States have described why they attacked this particular site, and they did so on the basis of an assessment that it was a legitimate military target playing a part in the Iraqi war effort.
Mr. Penny Ashton.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister agree with me that in considering the lessons of the terrible tragedy that took place in Baghdad last night, we should not forget that Saddam Hussein has, not through inadvertence, but as an act of deliberate policy, killed more Muslims than any other living person. Does he agree with me also that as the terrible toll for this war rises, so should our determination to build a just and durable peace that follows it? And may I therefore ask him the question that he, if I fear, dodged last week. Is he prepared to give the United Nations, in whose name we fight this war, the lead role in building the peace that follows?
I agree with the observations the right honourable gentleman made at the outset of his question. And to avoid any doubt, let me repeat the point again. The Allies are not targeting civilians, unlike Saddam Hussein, who continues to fire missiles wholly indiscriminately at built-up population centres. On the subject of the United Nations, we must clearly consider with all our colleagues in the Allied forces, and particularly the Arab states upon whose lands and around whose lands this conflict takes place, how we proceed with this matter at the end of the conflict.
Mr. Hugh Dykes.
Would my right honourable friend accept the congratulations of the House for the very successful visit to Germany on Monday, which, if you'll forgive the pun, far from being a brooding experience, was in fact a very successful visit both bilaterally and in terms of the resuscitation of European solidarity?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I do think it is important to ensure that we play a leading part in the centre of the community, and that does mean that we have the closest possible bilateral contact with all our European partners.
Mr. Dave Nillis.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Nillis.
Mr. Speaker, was yesterday's massacre of women and children in Al Amiri a good example under the 1977 Geneva Protocol of precision targeting of the right target or the wrong target? And was the burning and laceration of those children's bodies not, in fact, to correctly use a military euphemism, not the degrading of anybody in Baghdad, but of those in whose name that slaughter took place?
The honourable gentleman puts the matter in his customary bad taste and with his customary inaccuracy. As I explained to the House a moment or so ago, there has been precision bombing, and that particular site was bombed because there was legitimate reason to believe it was a military target.
Mr. David Nicholson.
Number 3, sir.
I refer my honourable friend to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Nicholson.
My right honourable friend will be aware of the concern at the advertising and the unsolicited temptations to borrow pursued by banks and other lenders in recent years, for which many businesses and any individuals are now paying a painful price. As interest rates come down, would my right honourable friend use his influence as Prime Minister, as former Chancellor and indeed a former banker to impress upon the banking industry the need for responsible lending, and would he consider what role the government can play in this?
Well, I have done as my honourable friend suggests, and my views on this subject I think are well known. I'm very glad indeed to see that the banks and building societies are addressing the question of the marketing and the provision of credit. As the banks acknowledge and have freely done so, the code that they have only covers banks and building societies. And that is why in December my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, issued a consultative document proposing a number of specific changes to tighten the law on consumer credit. These measures will have a wider field of application than just banks and building societies.
Hilary Armstrong.
Number 4, sir.
I refer the honourable lady to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Hilary Armstrong.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Prime Minister noticed the figures that were published yesterday, which demonstrated that the top 20 local education authorities providing nursery education were Labour and the bottom 20 were Tory. Given the dismal performance of Tory authorities, when his Secretary of State 2 weeks ago abandoned any commitment to the expansion of nursery education, did he have the Prime Minister's approval?
I think the honourable lady ought to look at the whole provision of education services throughout the country. And she might also look, if she is looking at lists of the top and bottom, she might also look at the list of the top of those authorities that have the highest community charges.
Mr. Robert G. Hughes.
I refer my honourable friend to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Hughes.
Would my right honourable friend take time today to send a message of congratulations to the voluntary bodies and statutory agencies who have worked so hard during the last few days to provide shelter for the homeless in London? Yeah. And will he note the comments of the Deputy Director of Shelter, who said the other day that the arrangements that were made were both magnificent and excellent?
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to join my honourable friend in congratulating all those involved, and particularly those voluntary organisations who cooperated so willingly with my honourable friend, the Minister of State for Housing. As a result of that swift response, there should be no need whatsoever for anyone to sleep rough on the streets of London during this period of extreme bad weather.
Mr. George Fawkes.
Number 6, sir.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Mr. George Fawkes.
Mr. Speaker, what is the Prime Minister going to do now that John Yates, the highly respected NHS management consultant, appointed by the government to advise on reducing waiting lists, has resigned, describing the government's policy which spends £100 million to find that waiting lists have actually increased as a total waste of money? Wouldn't it be better to sack the Health Secretary and keep Mr. Yates?
Yeah. Well, as it happens, my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, actually invited Mr. Yates to see him to discuss the matter. Mr. Yates refused.
William Hague.
Number 7, sir.
Number 7.
I refer my honourable friend to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Hague.
Will my right honourable friend find time today to reflect on the successful expansion of higher education under this administration? Are not the 1 in 5 of school leavers going into further and higher education, compared to a miserable 1 in 8 when the party opposite was in power, a crucial part of building a better trained and educated workforce? And is it not this government that is providing those resources?
Indeed it is, and my honourable friend is quite right. And I entirely agree with his remarks about the importance of higher education, both universities and polytechnics, and the role that they are playing in trying to equip our young people for a better start in life.
Mr. Andrew Welsh.
Is the Prime Minister truly aware of the crisis currently facing the agricultural industry, with farm incomes at their lowest levels in real terms since World War II and record numbers leaving the industry? Why then is the Ministry of Defence supplying Argentine and Uruguayan beef to British armed forces in the Gulf, when British cold stores are jam-packed with intervention beef subsidised and paid for by British taxpayers? Will the Prime Minister assist taxpayer, armed forces and the agricultural industry by sorting that out?
Well, it is because of absurdities like that that we are so keen to see a proper reform of the Common Agricultural Policy. My right honourable friend, the Minister of Agriculture, has made it clear that that is a top priority for us, and we will be seeking to negotiate that with our colleagues in Europe.
Mr. Graham Riddick.
Number 8, sir.
I refer my honourable friend to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Riddick.
Mr. Speaker, would my right honourable friend agree with me that today's problems of homelessness have been caused firstly by the way in which the private rented sector has been regulated almost out of existence, and secondly, by the incompetence of many local authorities, mainly Labour local authorities, who have over 100,000 council houses vacant up and down the country. Will my right honourable friend take this opportunity to confirm that his government will take the necessary radical action to free up and deregulate the private rented sector, so as to bring the many hundreds of thousands empty flats and rooms back onto the market?
Nothing could have illustrated the opposition's hostility to the private rented sector than their activities while my honourable friend asked his question. It was absurd that the private rented sector was declining because of rent control and properties left empty. We have introduced into the subsidy arrangements all sorts of incentives to encourage local authorities to bring properties into use. We are continuing to examine further ways of stimulating the private sector.
David Marshall.
Number 9.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave some moments ago.
David Marshall.
What does the Prime Minister have to say to the record number of 40,000 homeowners who had their homes repossessed during the last 12 months as a result of his high interest rates policies. What advice does he give those people?
All repossessions are a tragedy for those involved, but the honourable gentleman should bear in mind that the number of repossessions are less than 1/5 of 1% of homeowners, and the overwhelming majority of those are as a result of marriage breakdown.